So Kim Smith, also known as Kristen Stewart, she had a series of handlers, and these are men who controlled her. My guess is that they knew her before I met her, and the whole thing was an arranged setup. It was all set up. They had a series of situations that they planned out ahead of time, where they attempted to provoke hostilities in me, make my life unmanageable, and ultimately attempt to sabotage my life. So one of those handlers of Kristen Stewart was named Ving Rhames. I'm going to try to get the pronunciation here. Alright, it's Ving Rhames, and it has his birth date of 1959, May 12th, 1959. And he was known for roles like in Pulp Fiction. So what everybody needs to understand is that these actors that you see, they're not always played by the same individual. Sometimes they have several different men who all act as these actors. So Ving Rhames, he was known as Jamie White, and he lived in the Brookfield, Connecticut area. And I recognized him in this interview. And the truth is that I've seen different movies that Ving Rhames is in, and he does not look like Jamie White at all. But I was looking at this interview, and I recognized him. This is Jamie White. So he'll act as Ving Rhames only a portion of the time. So when I moved to the Brookfield, Connecticut area, I did not like any of the kids there. They would go out of their way to be rude and to pick on me. And I always thought something was wrong with the people in that area. And once again, this was an area where they housed a lot of their celebrities and involved all of their celebrities in MK Ultra games. And these MK Ultra games include sabotaging real people's lives. Once taking out all the families in a certain area, buying out all of the different properties in the area, and moving all of their own people in, what they'll do is they'll make a job available or make a property available to a certain family or a certain individual, and they'll bring regular citizens in that have nothing to do with them, and they'll play these games that will drive people crazy, that will sabotage their lives and will kill them. And they do this by surrounding the target with nothing but their people, and they'll act as regular people. Everybody at that person's workplace will be them. Oftentimes their spouse would be them. Their friends at school will be them. And all of these celebrities will have fake identities, and they have regular jobs, and they take part in these MK Ultra mind control games, these mind control practices where they pick out targets and they attack their targets. And this is a form of entertainment to them. This is what the Inside Group does as they take control over America. And many of these people are from England. So a good part of the time these people live in Brookfield, Connecticut. The Brookfield, Connecticut area. So like I said, Ving Rhames, he was known as Jamie White in the Brookfield, Connecticut area. He came from a family known as the Whites, and supposedly his parents were a mixed race relationship. I can't remember what he said, but either his mother or his father was white. I cannot remember who was white, but he was a mixed race, and he had one brother and two sisters, and his brother's name was Chris White, and his sisters' names were Kim White and Teresa White. Jamie was a real big, stocky individual who looked like a linebacker. His brother Chris was about 6'1", 200 pounds, so he was a little bit thinner. Kim White was tall and thin, and Teresa White was very short and very stocky, while Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, was around 6'2", and he weighed something like 260 to 300 pounds. He was very heavy. So I met Jamie White when I applied for work at Danbury Ambulance. I saw in the paper that they were advertising for wheelchair car drivers. And Jamie White was a captain at Danbury Ambulance. So Danbury Ambulance is a private ambulance company. They had ambulances, they had wheelchair cars, and they had limousines, and it was owned by a family named the D. Simones. So everybody would wear a blue shirt with an American flag on one of the shoulders, and it looked like something that a police officer or an ambulance driver would wear. We were given a pair of cargo pants, dark blue cargo pants. We were told to wear black or brown shoes, and we were given a jacket that said Danbury Ambulance on the back. So they really went out of their way to attempt to elevate Jamie White into a position that demanded respect. So Jamie White, he had a white shirt, and it looked almost like a military issue uniform that he wore. He had the insignia, the stripes that marked him as a captain, and he had a name tag, a metal-plated name tag. I think he may have even had little star medals that he buttoned to it. And he would buy everything at the different supply companies, I guess the uniform supply companies, that he could pin onto his shirt or hang onto his utility belt to kind of exemplify or mark him as a high rank. So once again, it was a little ambulance garage. I don't know why they need to take one of their people and give them a uniform that looked like something out of the military. And he had a small office that was right behind the dispatch office. When you would walk into Danbury Ambulance, there would be the dispatch office. There was a large plexiglass window, and you could see in. And they had all their different radios where they would communicate with the different people on the different ambulances. And toward the rear of the dispatch office was a small office with a desk in it. And that was Jamie White's office. And then toward the rear of the building was the employee lounge. And that consisted of maybe 3 or 4 sofas and a television set. And then they had a kitchen area with tables and chairs. And I guess that was important for the people that worked overnight shifts. You either worked an 8, a 12, or a 16-hour shift. And sometimes there was an hour or 2 between calls. So people would sit on the sofa and watch TV. Then they had a large garage. And the garage housed, I think, up to 6 ambulances. Or 5 ambulances and 1 chase car is what they called it. And that was an SUV that the paramedic would drive in. Oftentimes the paramedic would be in an SUV and would be dispatched to an area by himself. And he would meet the people in an ambulance at that emergency. So Danbury Ambulance, I think, played backup to the local Danbury Hospital. The Danbury Hospital had their own fleet of ambulances, and they were 911. If you called 911 in that area, you would get the ambulances out of Danbury Hospital. They were the first string of ambulances that would respond to an emergency call in the area. And then Danbury Ambulance would play backup to them. And the Danbury area is a pretty big city. Danbury and all the towns around Danbury is a pretty busy place. So we got a good deal of emergency calls every day. But they played backup to the local Danbury Hospital and their fleet of ambulances. So Jamie White is the person who interviewed me and hired me for the job. as a wheelchair car driver. They also had something like 5 or 6 wheelchair vans, and they would park those outside. And we did, of course, non-emergency calls for people in wheelchairs. And we would go pick up people who would be in wheelchairs and bring them to their different doctor's appointments. A large deal of that would be people out of nursing homes, and they would be going to their different doctor's appointments. So Jamie White established himself as a carefree boss. He was always smiling and joking around to win your trust. You know how there should be a professional relationship where the manager kind of instills the idea that he is a manager, but not really associating with the employees that he manages. So Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, did not follow that business model. In fact, he did the exact opposite. The only thing that he wanted to do was hang out with you and joke around with you. And he was very fake sometimes with how he would go out of his way to approach you. He would often ask you for a cigarette, and then he would want to go stand and hang out with you and joke around with you. And he was known to go out of his way to laugh at what you were saying. If you said something kind of amusing, I noticed he would go out of his way to act like it was very amusing to him, and he was really enjoying the conversation. But it seemed a little bit forced. It seemed like an act, what he was doing. For some reason, he went out of his way to want to hang out with me. And at that time, I thought that that was his personality that kind of got him ahead in the world. That was what he kind of did. And it was kind of an attitude where he would go out of his way to try to act like you were great. The person that he was hanging out with was just great. Nobody loved you more than Jamie White. And I thought that he basically picked up that personality. And that's what got him, I don't know, to succeed in life. So that was just his personality. The truth is that he was an agent for the United States military. He was most likely a member of a secret society like the Freemasons. And this is what a handler does to try to get close to the people that he is handling. So that is a process for the agents that are involved in MK Ultra. If they want to sabotage your life, all of these agents will try to get close to you and act as your coworker, act as your friend. They will act as your girlfriend or spouse. And the truth is that they harbor a lot of resentment for the people that they are targeting. They are really good at hate and jealousy and envy. It's like they do not have certain filters in their mind where they could ignore some of these impulses that may spark ideas of being envious or jealous of somebody. Many regular people disregard these impulses, these different ideas, because it's not good to walk around in an angry state. These people do not have those filters. The only thing they like to do is find reasons to dislike other people. If you're a good-looking kid, they'll dislike you. You have a cool car, they dislike you. Your parents were okay, they did okay by you. And you come from a regular house in middle-class America. These people will hate you for that. You're a good guitar player, you're a good artist, you like lifting weights, and you're in shape. Whatever they could find to be jealous of, they will. And the funny thing is that when they go in front of you, they have to act very fake around you to hide the fact that they do not like you. And part of that includes is that they go out of their way to act like you are really great. And I do not know a better phrase to use than kiss your ass. They are champion brown nosers. They are champion ass kissers. They are champion bootlickers. Because when they're not kissing your ass, they're kissing the authorities' ass. And that would be any rich guy in the area. That would be any ranking Freemason. That would be any higher rank in the military. So they really go out of their way to please those people. And they would do whatever it takes to please those people for more money, for a promotion, for a move up in their different secret societies. or organizations, and ultimately more money in the form of more roles in the Hollywood military establishment. If they want a spot in the next big movie, then this is what they do in the MK Ultra program. They will do whatever it takes to get close to the military's next target and do whatever they could do to sabotage that target's life. So he'll look at it as John Harwood, me, is standing between him and him getting his next big role. You get John Harwood out of here, you're going to be the next big star in the next big movie. So they come across as being very fake. So a dozen times a day, when I would go back to Danbury Ambulance between calls, I would run into Jamie White, who would want to go have a cigarette and joke around. So it did not take long for him to want to invite me to his house. He said, "I noticed that your wife," I think he called Kristen Stewart, she was my girlfriend and my fiancée, but he referred to her as my wife. He says, "I see your wife picks you up." And he said, "I live right near you in Bridgewater, Connecticut, which is close to New Milford, Connecticut, where Kim Smith and I had an apartment together." So Jamie White said, "Call up your wife and tell her that you have a ride home today, and we'll go hang out a little bit after work." So he had a nice red pickup truck, and he liked the band Metallica, and he said that he was really good at football in high school, and that he could have gone professional, but he had injured his knees. So at this time, in 1997, Jamie White said he was 38 years old. So we drove into Bridgewater. He said he wanted to show me his house and introduce his family to me. So the interesting thing was that he had a house built in the front yard of his wife's parents' house. They had a long driveway and they had a big field toward the right. And at the end of the driveway were two houses. So one belonged to his father-in-law and his mother-in-law, his wife's parents, and one of the houses belonged to him. And it was a new house. He said they just recently built it, and it was very close to his father-in-law's house. And something seemed odd about that. Something seemed very controlling about that. It seemed kind of unusual to do something like that. But I guess if they had a big property, that's something that they would do. But something seemed a little controlling about that. So it was a recently built house. It had a 2-car garage. And he drove his truck into the garage. And we got out and we met his wife and his 2 sons. And his wife was a white lady. And he had 2 sons. And at the time in 1997, his kids looked around 7 and 9 years old. They seemed 2 years apart. And they seemed around that age. So his wife had short hair. And she seemed friendly. And we did not hang out there very long. I just met and said hello to his 2 sons and to his wife. And then we walked back out to the truck. And he backed his truck out of the garage. And at that time, his father-in-law was walking down the driveway. And so we got out of the truck and had a short conversation with his father-in-law. And his father-in-law looked very old. His father-in-law looked like a senior citizen. And in my opinion, he looked something like a grumpy old man. So at that point he said, "Let's leave and let's go to your place. Now I want to see your house." And once again, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment on Railroad Street in New Milford, Connecticut. And the reason that I chose New Milford, Connecticut is because it had low rents. That was the only place where you could get a 2-bedroom apartment for $700 a month. And it was done real nice. That was the nicest apartment that I could find when I went out looking for apartments to rent. So even though it was about a half hour away from Danbury, a half hour, 40 minutes away from Danbury, I chose to live in New Milford, Connecticut because it was a nice apartment for only $700 a month. The places that I looked at in Danbury and Bethel seemed very old. Everything was very old and kind of run down compared to this apartment in New Milford. So I chose to rent that one. So we drove over to my apartment next. So I think he came in for a bit. He saw the place and then he left. So at that time I had a bench press set and some free weights. So that seemed to spark his interest because he used to be into lifting weights, he said. And he said, do you mind if I come over ever so often to lift weights? Because you have a nice bench press set there. It's the same weights that they'll have in a gym. So of course I said, sure. So around that time at Danbury Ambulance, I would notice that when I would get back to the headquarters, when I would get back to the Danbury Ambulance building at the end of my shift, Kristen Stewart, also known as Kim Smith, would be there waiting for me. At the time we had one car, and in the morning she would drop me off at work, and then she would drive to her job. And then at night, of course, she would come and pick me up. So when I would get back to Danbury Ambulance at night, I would see Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, standing outside talking to her. So I would punch out, and I would walk out to the car. I would get into the passenger seat, and Jamie White would try to keep us there for as long as he possibly could by talking to us. So the first time this happened, I thought he was doing that because he enjoyed talking to Kim, also known as Kristen Stewart. I thought that he just met her, so he was going out of his way to be friendly with her. But after about a half hour of talking to him, I said, I've had a long day. We really have to get going. And he would act like he didn't hear that, and he would say something else. So I remember Kristen Stewart seeming to really enjoy these conversations with Ving Rhames, also known as Jamie White. And that was because she always giggled. Around 1997, she was 17 years old. I was 21 years old. And Jamie White was 38 or 39 years old. And Kristen Stewart never said too much. For the most part, she would respond to questions. She would answer in short replies that did not tell you too much, and she would often giggle or laugh and try to act really cute around the people that she was talking to. So that was the way she acted when she wanted to win somebody over. Kristen Stewart, for the most part, was a very quiet girl. She never had a lot to say. So I would notice when she was trying to kiss somebody's ass or make a real good impression on them, like when she met my parents, she would act like this. And of course she was acting like this when she was talking to Jamie White. She would sit there and kind of giggle the whole time. So I had to remind him 3 or 4 times that it had been a long day for me. I just worked a 8-hour shift and I wanted to go home. And Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, would say something like, yeah, I'm here at 10 o'clock tonight. I have a 12-hour shift. So that was almost understandable the first time this happened. But what I noticed is that this would happen quite often. I would get back to Danbury Ambulance, I would punch out, and I would walk out to where Kim Smith was waiting for me. And there would be Jamie White leaning on the car talking to her. And every night, it would be the same thing. He would try to talk to us for as long as he possibly could. And I noticed that he was doing this on purpose, as a control thing. It was like a game to him. And he kind of had an unusual smile, like a mischievous smile, as he tried to keep us there after my shift for as long as he possibly could. So any normal person, you got some kid working for you, and he just worked a long shift. You don't go outside every day at the end of his shift and strike up a conversation with his 17-year-old girlfriend who's waiting to pick him up and then get off on the fact that he feels obligated to talk to you every day because you are his boss, and you're going to use that advantage of him trying to act like a nice guy by keeping him there for a half hour or hour after his shift because you're there till later in the night. So he's getting paid to stand out there on the street and smoke cigarettes and talk to kids that he knows, but I am not. So it's very rude and selfish for him to do that, to say the least. But he's doing that as a control thing. He's doing that as a handler, as if to say, look how much control I have over this kid. he just worked a long day and it's time for him to go, and I could keep him waiting outside for a half hour or 40 minutes just talking to me. So this is the sort of personality, a certain trait that you should look out for when recognizing these agents. This is what they do. It is impossible for them to hide these traits because this is what they're all taught to do. This is what they're taught to do to show that they have control over people. They do not act normal. They do not act sensible. In order to show that they have control over the people that they handle, they do things like this, where you can recognize that they're acting selfish or controlling. So if you start to see this in people, realize what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a military agent. So there's more and more of these agents every day. And the military is not keeping them in the barracks anymore. They're grooming them to become agents, and they're sending them out into the community because they want America to be a giant military police state. And they don't get it that way by keeping all their soldiers and their agents on military bases. They're all taught that they are society's handlers. They're all taught that they are somehow elite, that they outrank all of the citizens of the United States. And so they are entitled to control everybody. And now that the U.S. military has essentially been merged with all of the biggest monopoly corporations, the military and all these giant corporations have become one entity. And so these military agents are taught that it's normal to travel all around the country, and wherever they go, they are given manager positions or any position at all of these giant corporations. So they are groomed to feel very special. They are the elite. They are part of top secret military programs concerning handling America and the American economy. They are all high-ranking members of secret societies like the Freemasons. And then they are used on TV and in movies. So nobody is better than these people. They are the elite. They are the chosen ones. And if you are a regular citizen, you are nothing compared to them. So you're getting more and more of these people every day. More and more of these young people are being born into these military societies. So learn to begin to recognize these people in your own life, and you'll be able to recognize them for what they are. They are elitists. They have problems acting normal. They'll go out of their way to act fake around you, to hide that they really have hatred and disdain for you. And if you get to know them, they'll act controlling or act in ways that suggest that they are selfish and it's all about them. So they cannot help it to expose what they are. So as the months went on, I guess it was around the year 1998, I decided that I wanted to move up from being a wheelchair car driver to work on the ambulances. And at that time, I was starting to take a class to an emergency medical technician. And Jamie White would occasionally want to stop by after work to lift weights. And one of the things that I liked about Jamie White was that he seemed to know a lot of situations concerning emergency calls that he's been on. Because to make conversation, I would say, let's hear about another one of the emergencies that you've been on, where paramedics would be dispatched to and have to assess the situation and figure out what they would do. And now that I look back at this, I think he was getting a lot of these scenarios out of a book or from other people in the field. But when we would be hanging out, lifting weights for a conversation, I would say, tell me about another emergency call that you've been on. So at that time, he represented himself as a career EMT. I think he said he had been doing that for something like 10 years. So nobody knew emergency scene management better than Jamie White. But again, this is a common position that they put agents of the MK Ultra program in. The medical establishment because they want them to know how to act like hospital employees, doctors, nurses, and that way they could put on their uniforms and they could act as these things on TV. They could put on a white doctor's coat and act like a doctor being interviewed about COVID on TV. Think about how many reports we saw recently about the COVID virus. Our whole society, our whole economy has recently been restructured due to a virus outbreak called COVID. So think about how many reports that you saw on the news or on TV about COVID. Think about how many nurses and doctors and emergency room employees and medical staff that you saw interviewed on TV. So Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, will be perfect to act as a spokesperson for any of that. And two, another big thing that the military wants all their people to learn or have experience in is law enforcement. They want them to understand how to become cops, which stretches to the agencies like the FBI and the ATF and the alphabet agencies, as they're called. They could act as an FBI agent. So Jamie White went on to tell me a few things that were personal. And one of the unusual things he told me was that his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, was the actor Rob Lowe. That was his brother-in-law. I said, wow. So do you know him personally? Have you hung out with him? And he said, not really, but I've talked to him on the phone and stuff when he would call up. And another thing that Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, told me was that he met his wife, and I quote, at a gangbang orgy that was taking place, I think, he said, in New Milford, Connecticut. It was either New Milford or it was Brookfield, Connecticut. I think he said his wife grew up in New Milford, and then later her parents moved to Bridgewater. And like I said, Jamie White was supposedly from Brookfield, Connecticut. So I said, what do you mean saying that you met your wife at a gangbang orgy? And he said it was a wild party and they were running a train on his wife. And what that means is that there were a group of guys that were all having sex with his wife. So Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, was one of those men that was having group sex with his wife. And that was how he met his wife, at a wild party somewhere in New Milford or Brookfield, Connecticut. So once again, this is what happens with these MK Ultra agents. They are taught to be very promiscuous starting at a young age. I think all of these agents are molested when they're younger. They're sexually molested by all of these different people in these secret societies and these military-based communities that they are all a part of. They are taught to take part in group sex activities. They are taught to accept child molestation as normal. They are taught to accept sexual abuse as normal. I think that is how they regard it. They all got abused as youngsters. So it's something that's normal to all of them. And once again, that is what determines an outsider, is somebody who does not see that as normal. Somebody who is not getting sexually molested because they have normal parents. I think that is how the military chooses a lot of its different families that they promote. And that is, do these families care if you molest their kids? If their parents are pedophiles, they are going to get along good with the other pedophiles in their group. And based on what I've seen, I think they circulate all of their different kids through the community. The kids go and live with different people, and they get molested the whole time by a network of pedophiles in the community. So again, that is what distinguished people like my mother and my brother and I as outsiders, because their world is totally alien to us. My mother is not into abusing her sons or allowing other people to abuse her sons. She is into giving us a normal upbringing and raising us in a decent Christian household. So if you are not a part of that, these people that are have this disdain for you. They have this hatred for you. So that is another trait to look for, is are these people promiscuous? So Jamie White was promiscuous. Obviously his wife was promiscuous. And I did not know it at the time. But Kim Smith, also known as Kristen Stewart, was extremely promiscuous. And she passed herself off as the girl next door. She was the most cute and innocent looking girl you could ever see. She acted naive. She acted innocent. That was one of the reasons that I decided to date her, is she seemed like a very nice person. And a lot of the girls in the area were known to be promiscuous. A lot of the girls that I knew had a bad reputation. And when I met Kim, I thought, here is a nice girl who will be a suitable girlfriend, who I could trust and move in with and begin to leave the party days behind. For a couple of years, I was into going out drinking with my friends, and I would see what type of people we would come in contact with, what type of girls we would come in contact with. And that would be drunk people that you couldn't really trust or take serious. So when I met Kim Smith at our workplace, I thought this girl would be a good girl to settle down with. But I couldn't be more wrong. Her being part of the MK Ultra program, Kim Smith had been getting sexually molested since she was a little kid. And so when she got older, she was extremely promiscuous. And that was what I was about to find out. So once, I would say around 1998, this might have been around September of 1998, around a year after I started working for Danbury Ambulance. And so Jamie White decided to come over our house one Friday night, and we were going to go get some alcohol, do a little drinking, and then get something to eat like a pizza. And so Jamie White, myself, and Kristen Stewart were drinking. And so I noticed that Kristen Stewart acted familiar with Jamie White. When she got a little intoxicated at one point, she kind of sat next to him and she put her hand on his thigh. And I noticed that. And even though that she only did that briefly, it suggested that she was familiar with him. But from my perspective, she only knew him through me. So through that, I kind of saw that she was familiar with him. Them both being agents of the MK Ultra program. They were part of the military Hollywood establishment. And they were both probably contracted out to spy on me, to get close to me, because I was a target of the MK Ultra program. So I remember that night, Jamie White was acting like he was drunk. And around 10 o'clock at night, we decided to go get a pizza. So I drive us there, and he's acting real drunk. And when we get to the parking lot of the pizza place, he pulls out a wad of money and said, "I'll pay for the pizza. Here you go." And he hands me a wad of money and then appears to pass out in the car. He lunges forward and begins to nod out. So of course I think it's a little bit funny, and I want to see how much he's handed me in his drunken state, because of course I would give him back his money. So I went into the pizza restaurant, and I'm standing in line, and I'm counting the money that he handed me. And he handed me something like $650. And it being a Friday night, I'm sure that he has cashed his check, and in his drunken state has handed me the money. So of course this is a tactic of theirs to A, get you to trust them, and 2, probably for something else that has a more sinister intent. So when we get back to the house, we go inside with the pizza, and we're having our pizza. And I said something like, "Do you want your change back?" And he said, "No, you can keep it." And I said, "I don't know, that's a lot of change." And I held up the wad of money that he's handed me. And I said, it's something like $650. And I'm kind of holding it in front of him. And he begins to laugh. So I hand him back his money. And he finishes his slice of pizza. And then says that he has to go call his wife. But he left his cell phone in his truck. And so he walks outside for a little bit. And then he walks back and stands right in the door and says, I have to take off now. My wife is upset. And she wants me home now. And I said, that's not a good idea. You driving. A second ago, you could barely stay awake. You were about ready to pass out. And he said something like, something came over me. I had a head rush, but now I'm better. That last beer went right to my head. But I only had something like 4 drinks. So, I'm not that bad. And I said, what if you get pulled over? And he said, we don't have a cop in Bridgewater, Connecticut. There's something like a stay-at-home trooper, but he never patrols the streets. So we don't really have a cop in Bridgewater, Connecticut. He said, besides, I think it's shift change now in New Milford, so I'm not going to run into any cops. He said, anyway, I am fine, and I have to get going. And he just walks away. So I was kind of surprised, because a moment ago, he was acting like he was about ready to pass out. So my guess is that the original plan was to act drunk, possibly spend the night at my house, and then fool around with Kim Smith, because that is exactly what she started to do with all of my friends. If I had friends over and we would be drinking, oftentimes they would ask to crash on the sofa so they did not have to drink and drive. And of course I said sure. And Kim Smith would fool around with them. I would be asleep in the back bedroom and she would go fool around with them. I think one individual told me that Kim Smith would want to leave in a car and go have sex in a car somewhere so they would not get caught if I happened to wake up. So these friends of mine, these quote-unquote friends of mine, all turned out to be celebrities. So some of the people that she was cheating on me with were Kip Pardue, Dave Chappelle, Ving Rhames, Joaquin Phoenix, and I do not have his professional name yet, but Albie Reyes. He may have portrayed Ice Cube. Ice Cube started his career in the 1980s with the rap group NWA, but he acted for dozens of years after that. So I think later on, Albie Reyes may have acted as Ice Cube a couple of times. Once again, they have several different men that all act as Ice Cube or as any celebrity. But when you begin to understand what these agents are, they play many different roles. So Albie Reyes could have played any number of different roles. But that's my preliminary guess, is that he may have acted as Ice Cube. So Kim Smith, also known as Kristen Stewart, was known to get drunk and then have sex with my friends. So a few times she was very obvious about that, especially when she would get intoxicated. It was like a different personality would come over her. So I think that that was Jamie White's plan, to act drunk, hand me something like $600, and if I were to pocket that money like a scumbag would, that would give him a certain level of power, at least in his mind, that I was somebody that would take advantage of a drunk friend, so that then he may feel entitled to then take advantage of me. So even though it did not happen that night, I believe that Ving Rhames and Kristen Stewart did meet and have sex. They may have even known each other before I even met her. But what I found out toward the end of our relationship is that Kristen Stewart was even having sexual relations with her own uncle, who acted as Jared Leto. This was her mother's brother. So that is why the CIA, that is why the Freemasons, that is why the MK Ultra program likes to control people through gambling and gambling debts and drugs and drug debts, because it's very easy to get your targets indebted to you. They owe you money for drugs, for gambling debts. So it's very easy to provoke these agents to attacking these people or doing whatever they can to set these people up to get attacked. If the people begin to owe them money, if the people begin to act in undignified or immoral ways. The problem is if you are stupid and you don't know who you are dealing with. The military and all of these secret societies, they are organized crime. And you might think that you owe some money to a drug dealer, when in fact you owe money to a military agent. And that military agent is trying to kill you. And they're looking for any excuse to do that. So a drug debt or a gambling debt will only be an excuse to them that will build up the momentum for them to finally attack you. You cross that line with them. You think they're stupid. You think they shouldn't be taken serious. You don't think that you have to pay them back. You think you could get away with anything. So they're in the right and you are in the wrong. This is all a mind game. This is what it takes for a lot of these people who are employed to get close to you, to work up the nerve or the reasoning to attack and to kill you. So you have to remember that. You can't stray into their world. You cannot stray into their world of immorality and think that you're stronger than they are in that world. These people are pure evil. And they work for pure evil. And they're calling you into their world of drugs, of prostitution, of gambling. They're calling you into that world to use that against you. Because ultimately they want your life. They want everything that you have. And then they want your life. Once they take everything from you, what more can they take? You're a drug addict. Or you gambled all your money away. What more can they take from you? And that is your life. They'll take you and they will turn you into a snuff film victim. So you do not want to give these people any advantage over you. And that is a big part of being streetwise. A lot of people don't understand what it means to be streetwise. And one of the things to being streetwise is that you don't owe anybody anything. You're dignified on the street. Nobody has anything over you. You know how to handle yourself on the street. You're not in debt to anyone. So it's hard to get close to you. A lot of people think what it takes to be streetwise is the art of bullshit. Is to pay people back a little bit at a time and then have a new bet. And if you make money off this bet, you can pay back an old gambling debt. And what a thrill it all is. That is going to get you killed. That is not what it takes to be street smart. To be street smart is to understand what you are dealing with. So that is why all of these small-time drug dealers always get caught. If you don't work for the Freemasons, if you don't work for the CIA, if you don't work for the United States military and you're selling drugs, sooner or later the cops will bust you and they'll take all the money that you earn selling drugs. They'll take whatever possessions that you've acquired selling drugs. All that becomes the property of the police, of the government. Everything that you earned selling drugs gets shifted toward the government. They take over everything from you because they are the head drug dealers. They are the officials in the organized crime underground. If you are not part of their network, sooner or later they will bust you. So you better not owe anybody money. You better not take any drugs on front and think you're going to go sell them real quick and bring back the drug dealer their money, because that will be a setup. The cops bust you, put you in jail, and you've lost the head drug dealer's drugs. You owe the head drug dealer thousands of dollars now. How are you going to pay that back when the cops have taken everything from you? And after you get out of jail, you go back to your mom's house and you have nothing but a drug dealer stalking you that you owe thousands and thousands of dollars to. So these are all games that they'll play on you. So that was what Ving Rhames was doing that night, by acting like he was drunk and saying, I'll pay for the pizza, and handing me something like $650, like he has no idea what's going on, and he's something that I can take advantage of, and he's going to hand me $650. So that's the one thing that works real good with evil, are scumbags. And that is how a majority of these agents, how they got caught within this group, and they can never get out of this group. And that is that they fall for all of these scams. If you did that to Ving Rhames, if I acted drunk and handed him $600 like I have no idea what I'm doing, he wouldn't let me know about it. He wouldn't try to give me that money back. He would think that he could treat me like a sucker. So all of these agents, oftentimes they get kept in their little world, and they continue to be controlled and be used and be taken advantage of, because they act like scumbags. They try to rip off anybody that they can. So they fall for a lot of these games. So I'll tell you, some of their best agents are their best hoes. They fall for everything. They can't figure anything out. The only thing that they could do is get caught up in this web. So many of these agents, they fell for a lot of this stuff, and they get themselves killed for it all the time. So while this was happening, Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, he was going on 40 years old, and he was having sex with Kristen Stewart, who was 17 or 18 years old. So he's twice as old as she is. He could be her father. So this is how idiots like Ving Rhames get arrested for pedophilia, statutory rape. This is what happens all the time within their society, to their own agents even, because these people are dumb and they have no control over themselves, and they have no idea about morality or decency. So at work, Ving Rhames, he used his position of authority. He's the captain of Danbury Ambulance. He's the manager of Danbury Ambulance, and any young girl who would apply to work there, Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, would date them. They were high school age, and once I remember he said that he just hired a new girl, and she's real hot, and she's a senior in high school. So why doesn't me and Kim Smith hang out with him and his new little girlfriend that he just hired to work at Danbury Ambulance one night? And a couple of other kids that work as wheelchair car drivers will be there too. They're going to go to some lake and have a few beers near this lake. So why don't you bring Kim and meet us over there? So he had just hired this 18 or 19-year-old girl as a wheelchair car driver, and within a week or two, he's trying to have sex with her. He's getting her drunk, and he wants to go out and have sex with her. And he wants to hang out with all the younger people that work for him. I was around 22 years old at the time, and I was the oldest one that he was hanging out with. So he was just crazy. And one time he walked into the employee lounge and said, "Hey John, do you have a second? Come into my office." So I walked into his office, and he's in an idiotic mood, and he begins to talk about an adult film that he saw recently. And he hikes his knees up, and he takes his index finger and his middle finger, he puts them together, and he smacks his tongue with his two fingers. And then he starts to imitate the action of a female masturbating, and he's flicking his tongue in and out, And he's doing this in his office. And he's wearing his perfectly ironed uniform with his captain's stripes on his shoulders. And all of his stars and his pins and his name tag and all his Boy Scout regalia and patches on his uniform. And I say something like, is that all you called me in here for? Because I was busy doing something before you called me in here. So that's what Jamie White, also known as Ving Rhames, would do with a position of authority. He would act like that. So he's a very immature-minded individual. He has no morality. He has no common sense. This is somebody that the military will like to promote, that they could control. This is probably somebody that has a lot of things hanging over his head that could be used against him. He has probably fallen for more than one of their games. And that is exactly how this MK Ultra program goes on to control people. That is why they have so many pedophiles in their group. I think all of them are pedophiles because these people would do anything, and the military always has blackmail to use against them. So these people would do nothing but more crime for the US military. And they will do nothing to alert the American people. They'll do nothing to grow a conscience. So when you think that some of these people that work for the MK Ultra program are suddenly going to grow a conscience or discuss what they know, you have to realize what you're dealing with. All of these people should be locked up in mental hospitals or prisons, but instead they're rewarded and they're paid to do illegal things, to act like criminals. So they get locked up one day for pedophilia, and then they get released and paid to be pedophiles the next. They're not going to grow a conscience. They're not going to expose what they know. So everyone has to realize what they are dealing with. These people are not to be taken serious. And if you know some of this, and you know their games, and you know how to be streetwise, they're going to hate you all the more and go out of their way to get you caught or get you in trouble in some other way. So that is what you have as the FBI. That is what you have as all these cops. They're nothing but criminals in uniforms. And that is what you have acting as your president and as your governors and as your senators. They are a bunch of pedophiles and criminals themselves. That's what they all are. So there is never going to be any type of government disclosure project. They are never going to do that. They might act like they're going to do that to whitewash a scandal, but there's never going to be a real expose by them. It's going to be up to us, the American people, regular citizens, that will have to discuss what we know about them. And that is going to include America sobering up, waking up, and realizing what has surrounded them and what has taken over our country. Because everyone now is asleep. Everybody now is intoxicated. Everybody now has anxiety problems. And the only thing they know how to do is get real nervous in public and then go home and watch TV and listen to all these criminals' BS. That's not going to work. And the key to waking up is to become sober. Quit drinking. Quit taking prescription medication. Quit smoking. Quit sitting around watching TV every weekend. And become active. Go and see your world. Start running. Start hiking. Start biking. And then go take a good look at the cities and towns around you. Bring a camera and begin to analyze your videos and see what you may have missed when you go there in person. And if you see something that you do not understand, a building, a corporate name, you hear something, go and look it up on the internet. Do a little bit of research. Take an interest in your world. Because the people on TV are not going to tell you any real information. They're going to come up with one BS story after the next that is designed to capture your attention. One BS story after the next that is designed to waste your time so that you do not focus on what these establishment criminals are up to. about destroying our country and all the good people in it. Okay, so we had an employee lounge at Danbury Ambulance, and for some reason it was real popular to have Jerry Springer on, the Jerry Springer Show on. They loved watching that show at Danbury Ambulance. And I know it's a little bit dated now, but the Jerry Springer Show gained popularity in the late 90s because there would be fist fights on the show. It was a talk show that had the lowest IQ degenerates that they could find in America go on stage and argue, usually about relationships, sexual relationships, marriages, who's cheating on who. You're the father of my kid, but in this show, I'll tell you who the real father is. So the people at Danbury Ambulance loved that show, and that would always be on in the morning at Danbury Ambulance. If you didn't have a call, and you would come back to the Danbury Ambulance building and go into the employee lounge, they would have that show on. So a big thing was for the women to take off their shoes and hit people with their shoes. If your husband is cheating on you, the woman will pull off her high heel shoe and then go to hit the husband with her shoe. So the reason I tell you this is because around 1999, Jamie White hires two young kids to be wheelchair car drivers. And I think their names were Trevor and James. And they had both gone to Danbury High School. And Jamie White, he sees me at Danbury Ambulance one day and he says, I hired a couple more guys to work on wheelchair. And he says, both of them went to Danbury High School. I think they were in your wife's graduating class. So I think they know her. And he's kind of looking at me funny. And he says, I just thought you should know that. So he leaves it very cryptic, like he's telling me that to try to hint something that I should be concerned of. And of course, this subliminally puts jealousy in my mind. What does he mean by that? Why would he say it like that? And the reason he did that was to try to provoke me, to try to cause some problem, to act like he knew something. So of course, it gets my mind going. I'm still a young man at that time. I was 23 or 24 years old. So I asked Kim if she knows them, and she says yes, and she gets quiet. So one day I get back from a call, and I'm sitting in the employee lounge, and Trevor comes in, and I cannot remember if he brings it up or if I bring it up. I would not be surprised if he brought it up and said something like, you date Kim Smith, don't you? And I'm like, yup. That's why I knew her. And Trevor says, didn't she get pregnant or something? And I said, excuse me? And he said, back in high school, wasn't Kim pregnant? And I said, I don't know. Was she? And he said, that was a rumor that we all heard, that Kim was pregnant. She was pretty young too. So of course this bothers me to find out that his girlfriend, I guess, was having sex so much that she got herself pregnant when she was 15 or 16 years old back in high school. And of course I'm finding this out from an airborne ranger who just got hired at Danbury Ambulance. So isn't this awkward? Isn't this confusing? So I think I called Kim on the phone because this was disturbing to me. There's a payphone there, and I called her at work. She was at work as a receptionist somewhere, and she said, I'm going to be down there on my lunch break. So now that I look back at it, the whole thing seemed scripted. It seemed like something these people would come up with as a form of street theater. So I was standing outside, and Kim Smith, also known as Kristen Stewart, drives up in my car. And she gets out and she says, is Trevor here? And I said, yeah, I think he's in the employee lounge. And she said, well, go get him. So I walked in and said, Trevor, Kim is outside. She wants to talk with you. So I guess Jamie White somehow saw this, and he also followed us out. It was me Trevor, and Jamie White. We walk outside the door. Kim Smith takes off her high heel shoe, and she goes to hit Trevor with it. And Jamie White, he jumps into action, almost as if he knew what the plan was. And as soon as the shoe comes off, Jamie White runs and intercepts Kim just as she raises the shoe up and goes to hit Trevor. And he picks her up and he kind of runs with her for a second, carrying her for a second. And Kim Smith is yelling, "I gave my whole life to that man. I don't know why you are telling him these things, these terrible lies." And I've never seen Kim Smith act so dramatic. She was quite an actress. It was quite believable. But now that I look back, I realize that this was street theater. This whole thing was set up by them. And Kim Smith is one hell of an actor. They all were. Jamie White and Trevor, the Airborne Ranger. They were all actors. And they set this whole thing up. And what this did was instill Jamie as the hero, as the handler. He was there to prevent Kim from attacking Trevor. I hesitated. I didn't realize what she was going to do. So Jamie is a lot quicker than I am. So we should all be grateful for guys like Jamie. What a good friend he is. The truth is that Jamie White is king pedophile. Jamie White started all of this. This was a whole confusing and awkward situation for me to be in. And I owe it all to Jamie White and Trevor. And of course, we can't leave out Kristen Stewart. They probably all had a good laugh afterwards about it. You should have seen the look on John's face. And then Kristen Stewart, Trevor, and Jamie White, and Jamie White's wife. They could all have a gangbang together at some hotel room. And maybe Kim's uncle would even knock on the door and also get involved with that. Because that is what you're dealing with when you get into a relationship with one of these MK Ultra agents, with one of these military Hollywood establishment agents. They are all crazy.